Okay, well, welcome to our grand finale, our last episode of the Noble Experiment, the maiden voyage of our G.A.P Great Books partnership with GTV. And we're wrapping up Snow Falling on Cedars by Dan Gunderson. Lots to talk about, I think, as we spent 8 weeks, 9 weeks really, if you count in the break, discussing, thinking about, writing about this very interesting book. And this is the one time I can't ask if you've read ahead and make a bad joke, and I won't do it for the 8th time, I promise. All right, so we'll just, I guess, can jump right in. Does anybody have any questions to start with or comments? How about this? Are people, I'm kind of getting to the end at the beginning here, but people are happy with or unhappy with the ending? Satisfying ending. Satisfying ending. Oh, all around. Good. Okay, interesting. Good. Well, we can jump right into the questions. Oh, and I didn't talk to our audience out there. Remember, if you want to join us live on Twitter, we're on Twitter at G.A.P Great Books. Those 3 words all together, G.A.P Great Books on Twitter. And we also have an email, G.A.P Great Books, all one word, G.A.P Great Books, all squished together, at sau19.com. That email is gapgreatbooks at sau19.com. Okay, so let's jump right in. In chapter 29, the closing arguments of the 2 attorneys, Hooks and Goodmanson. Get to my book here. Oh, make sure I have my glasses. If not, I will squint. Yes, I do. Fancy job lot specials. All right, so. So the question we're given is, compare the 2 closing arguments. Was there anything that stood out to you from the prosecuting attorney's arguments? Well, let me put it to you this way. I'll put it this way. When you're a lawyer, what are you supposed to be presenting to the jury and the judge? What specific things? What are they called? Hopefully they're called. Facts, right? You want to present facts. Okay? So if you go back and look at what he says in his closing argument, I would say that he incorporates some facts, some inarguable facts, but he throws in a few other things, and I noticed some in particular on page 415, but I don't know if you might have seen them anywhere else. There's a few things he does. He makes up something using the facts. What does he make up? And that's okay. It's not necessarily bad to draw inferences from the information that you're given. That's what we do when we read a book like this. So he comes up with what? using all the facts he's gathered. Good. Yes, he comes up with a story, right? Here's what happened. And basically, in short, Kabuo faked his boat breaking down and killed him when he came over. Okay, that's the story he comes up with. He says all the evidence points to that. Everything we've heard, all the testimony, all the evidence with the rope and the batteries and the blood and the stick, all tells us that this story is definitely what happened. It's clear. It's obvious. Okay, so I can go with him that far. But there's, on 4:15, right break there are a couple sentences that I thought. And he says, we're talking about looking clearly at the defendant and seeing the truth self-evident in him. I'm going to say that again. The truth evident in him and in the facts present in this case. So the truth self-evident in him and the facts present in this case. Take a good look, ladies and gentlemen, at the defendant sitting over there. Look into his eyes. Consider his face. And ask yourself what your duty is as citizens of this community. I think there's something in addition to facts that he's drawing attention to. His race, I think very clearly. And not only his race, well, I'll tie it in with the race, his demeanor. He's sitting there stoically. And I was thinking about this last night. I was wondering why we hadn't talked about it, and I think we ran out of time in earlier chapters. And there was something that I did want to address that was mentioned earlier in the book about why Kabuo does not seem to have that to fight back and to vindicate himself, to clear his name, because he's not guilty of this murder. There's a reason that is revealed earlier in the book, and I apologize for skipping over it because I think it's really interesting. I think it's important. And let me say it again. I'm going to emphasize a word. Ready? He doesn't seem to have any energy or oomph to vindicate himself or clear his name for this murder.
He was wasn't he on trial before, or
In his,
accused
not literally, but figuratively. All the killing. Remember what? I don't know if it was a little while ago. He like anybody I think who goes through, replays in his mind all the people that he killed. Right? And I think, and then he kind of says to himself, maybe I deserve this. Even though he didn't kill Carl, maybe I deserve this. And that's why he's kind of taking it. Do you remember that? I forgot to point that out, and I thought that was important. But something that psychology will tell you, ethics will tell you, is that the healthy human being is the one who feels these things. It's a good sign that he feels bad about these things. Good sign that they're haunting him. It tells you, what does it tell you about him? He's a good person. He's good. There's good in him, and he is good because these things that he did, which are, as close to as evil as they get, but are part of war, trouble him. So that was something else I had wanted to discuss. Part of the reason he sits there so ramrod straight the whole time. Okay. And let's Gudmundson's final presentation. He does something similar in that he brings out the facts and say, these are the facts, but they're not enough to prove within a reasonable doubt that this is what happened. There are circumstantial things, and there's maybes and could haves and would haves, but there's no definite evidence. So he goes to that part of the case, but then he does something similar. Hooks goes into a broader idea of racial animosity, and those people, that we just finished a war with, okay? That's what he goes for. He's going to appeal to the jury's sense of ingrained racism and animosity based on the prior war. That's what he's going to go for, on a broader sense. Gudmundson goes for something else on a broader sense, and it's on page 417. One of the lawyers appeals to their sense of being different. They're the community. He's an outsider. You're the community. Do your duty. And he tries to separate Kabuo from them. That's his angle. Gudmundson, in his closing remarks on page 417, appeals to another side of their character. What does he go for? The similarities. And a sense of what right in here? What's the sense, if you're on a jury, you're judging what? You ever see that statue of Justice? Toga or whatever. Do you know what she has on her head? Okay. Something else. You ever seen that? Holding the scales of justice? Hold. Okay, so a sense of what? Fairness. A sense of right and wrong. And he says there, and this is on 417, he says, the counsel for the state has appealed to an argument based on he's asked you to look closely at the face of the defendant, presuming that because the accused man is of Japanese descent, you will see an enemy there. Okay? So he goes right for it and says, you know what? Do you know why he just did that? Because he thinks you're going to be racist. Right. He goes right for it. And then he says, if you see in his face a lack of emotion, if you see in him a silent pride, it is the pride and hollowness of a veteran of war who has returned home to this. Okay? Here's somebody who fought the United States against people of his own descent, from his cultural background, I should say. And this is what he gets. He's assumed to be them. Okay? And then he goes on and makes quite an eloquent speech. And I just wanted to close out on 419. Maybe it's that English teacher bug I've got. I'm sorry. Is it catching? No? Not really. Okay? But a little buzzer went off in my head when I heard this line at the end. In the name of humanity, do your duty as jurors. In God's name, in the name of humanity, do your duty as jurors. And it was like ding, 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 ding. The little buzzer went off. And if we go back to this other book that you may be looking at, it's the How to Read Literature Like a Professor. One of the chapters talks about how ideas are recycled and come back again and again and again. So I don't know if I was the only one When I read that line, it reminds me of another story that most of you should have read, and most of you may have even seen the film. Yes! Woo-hoo! We should have like fireworks or something, like confetti and stuff. Oh, that would be awesome if that happened. But, oh well, that's the best I can do. But you're right, To Kill a Mockingbird. Atticus gives a speech to the juror, and not only talking about the facts of the case, and why, but he talks about the broader idea of what was going on there, and what was happening to Tom Robinson. And at the end, he says, "In the name of God, do your duty. In the name of God." And it's amazing. Like when I read that, I was like, "Oh my goodness!" It's like deja vu there. So interesting little time to read it. I highly recommend it. It's outstanding as well. Okay. So he's appealing to their sense of decency and right and wrong, as well as the facts. Okay. Second question. Why are the judge's instructions important to the jury? And at the end, he tells them, what does he tell the members of the jury? Why is it important? What are the instructions? Why are they important?
Remind the jurors that they're not trying his character or
Yes.
not his race, not what he stands for.
Yeah, to not be biased.
Yes, he makes a point of trying to emphasize that. I don't know that he's necessarily overtly trying to persuade them, but I think he's trying to refocus things on this is about the facts, this is about reasonable doubt, and he also says this is about listening to one another. So it's interesting in the broader thematic view of this novel, there's a bigger message there too, I think, which is about listening to one another, thinking clearly, not thinking based purely on emotion, and particularly thinking based on hatred or past hatred. And finally, for this chapter, I found the last sentence interesting. Well, yes, the last two sentences. The storm keeps getting tied back into the novel. I don't know if you noticed that. But it says, "The storm," said the judge, "beyond our control. The outcome of this trial is not. The outcome of this trial is up to you now. You may adjourn and begin your deliberations." This is on 422. We've talked a lot about the storm and how the destruction, if you will, the loss of power, the trees, the cars, show that mankind is really small in certain ways, that you can't control these things. And so the judge brings it around and he says, the storm is beyond our control. And the storm could be a metaphor for what? What other storm are they facing? What's the storm in the community? Storm and the windstorm. The murder and the trial. And so he says that we can't control these things. Okay? But the outcome of the trial is not out of our control, which is a really cool thing. I mean, if you ever, I know you all read the Stephen Covey when you were freshmen, The 7 Habits. Okay? Oh, I see the big smiles everywhere. But one of his first principles is you can't, your circle of control, if you remember that. You can't control things. But what you can control is how you respond. There are things, what he's saying is a broader theme here is things in the world that are out of our control. Okay? There are big things. But we can control our own reaction, and there is our circle of control. There are things in our immediate circle that we can do something about. Okay, so that's what he's trying to tell them. Okay, on 2 levels. So I really thought that was pretty neat. And of course, some of you know I love 7 Habits, so I'll bring it up anytime I can. All right, chapter 30. The power comes on. Any symbol? You've all had the power go out in your homes, apartments, right? What does it feel like if the power's been out for a long time and then it comes back on? How does it feel? It feels great, right? What is it that makes you feel great about the power coming back on? It's over. With what? Things are back to normal, right? Back to civilization, okay? Right? So it's when the power comes on, it's something like, okay, there's a transition occurring in the novel as well as literally with the power. So they're coming on into a new moment where this thing where nature was in control and man is out of control has ended, and civilization is taking control again. Okay? You go from, Rousseau, you ever talk about the savage, or the noble, the savage, the noble savage, and now civilization, society. Okay? So I think that's what I would definitely see that. Things are back to normal. All righty. Number 2, when Ishmael thinks about Hatsu, he thinks, quote, to feel her hair. Says, what does this tell you about Ishmael's ruminations, thoughts? I have my own opinion about that, but I'll let you reflect on that. He thinks about, it's not just that, it says, what he wanted, he realized now, was to drink in the smell of her and to feel her hair in the hands, are the actual words. That's when he sees her. It was all the more acute for not having her and wanting, like the wish he had to be whole again. What does it mean to be whole again? There's 2 meanings for that for him. To be with her again, and what else? To be whole again. His arm, right? So, do you remember the description of Carl, the relationship between Carl Heine and his wife? The nature of that relationship? Was it this deep intellectual, no? What was it? Yeah, it was very physical, right? Very physical. And that's made very clear. But then, when he says this, that came back to me. When he said that, he wanted, think about that. It doesn't say he couldn't wait to have a great conversation with her or talk about the old days or blah. He's thinking about physical. He wants to possess her in some way, in a physical way. And I thought that was striking. Okay? And so I on possession, physical ownership of the person. Okay? And sometimes when people get, I think, into a relationship with somebody, they want to own them, right? And that becomes unhealthy. I would say, would you say at the point that his feelings are unhealthy, by the way?
Yeah.
Yes? Why?
Because he's done some stuff that's a little something that you like desperate.
Look, he's desperate. I mean, it's been how many years? It's been many years, and he's still angry about it. And remember, he still has the evidence in his pocket. The trial is basically over, except for the verdict, and he's got the evidence in his pocket. Okay, so he's still holding on to it. That So that was my sense. I don't know what you thought when you saw that. I mean, it seems romantic to some degree. You know, I want to smell your hair again and everything. That'd be nice. There's nothing. That's what he's thinking about only. I mean, her husband is about to could get executed here. That's what he's thinking about. So is that love? That's just something that, I don't know. Note the references to Ishmael's father, including Hatsu's calling the paper your father's newspaper. Important juncture at this moment. I think it is important that his father comes up a few times, starts to come up here. Because one of his struggles in life, aside from his relationship with Hatsu and getting over that, what is another struggle? I mean, think about it. You take over your business that was very, very successful. Think of any that they would own that's really successful, really popular, everybody loves it, everybody respects it, and now you take over. Kind of symbolic of what happens just sometimes in life with people and their parents. What is the issue? Yes, trying to fill his father's role. His dad was a great, not an incredibly famous, but a very good man, apparently. And now he's got to follow in his footsteps. And he's reminded of that here. And the thing is, he's also reminded, I think, that he has an opportunity here. Heard that saying, what would Jesus do? Okay. What here would be, what would Dad do? What would Dad do right now? Okay. And he's kind of realizing that that's really who he is. He's his father's son. And there's a couple descriptions in there where it's like he realizes he's sitting in that chair. Remember, he's sitting in his dad's chair, and he's thinking, just like his dad used to sit and think about things. And he's like, I'm my father's son. That's who I am. I don't know if you've ever done that. You find yourself, when you're really young, you're like, I'm never going to be like you. And then right around now in life, I think for you guys, is when you start finding yourself saying and acting and doing things that you're like, oh no. Right? What? Where'd that come from? Okay? It's very natural. Very natural, very natural. Okay? It's not universal. It doesn't happen every single 100% of the time, but it's very normal. And it's very normal sometimes to want to emulate and to follow in the footsteps in some way, or at least to model some of the values. This comparison, people are saying, your dad would, this is what your dad would have done. It's your dad's paper. Okay? How does he, so when he takes that, what's the struggle though with, what's the struggle with being reminded that, on the other hand, what's the downside of that when someone says it's your dad's paper and it's you're doing your dad's job and your dad would have done this and your dad this, your dad that. What's the downside of that? What does every human being really want to be? Excellent. Recognize for what they're doing. Independent. Yeah. Being compared to someone else is just, it's the younger sibling's nightmare, right? It's like, oh, so your sister was, I had your sister. That's the last thing you want to hear when the teacher, introduces you. It's like, I'm an independent person. So he has that struggle as well. And Nels points that out to him. And question here about the description of the storm's aftermath. How does it fit with the symbolism? And that's on 427, 428, and there's some description of the cars down, but he makes a comment on page 428 on the top where it says, destruction could be beautiful. Destruction could be beautiful. how can destruction be beautiful? I remember in the election a couple of years ago with Romney and Obama, they were talking about business, and the term creative destruction came up a few times. People were talking about creative destruction. And then that term was thrown around in some other areas, creative destruction. So how could destruction be good?
It gives you the, authenticity, like you have to start over and over.
Yes, great. It clears out things and starting new. Okay? Okay. And now I'm going to need some biology help. But aren't there some trees that only, like their seeds only open up when it's really hot, when there's a fire? Does anybody know about those? I think there's like a tree or a seed that only open when there's a fire around. It's like, it's a way they rejuvenate. Oh, now, well, I could Google it, but I know that there's such a thing. Really, that forest fires are kind of a good thing. They kind of clear things out, and they start life over again. Okay? Nature's cruel that way, in some regard, right? Storms, things that, volcanoes, all these things that happen destroy things, but then new things arise out of those. So I think that line there is what struck me, that this storm is going to result in something better. Okay? That it's going to clean out some things. Okay, so maybe this storm of this trial might result in something better. And lastly, we get insight into the jurors' discussions. Very quickly, what do you see in the jurors' discussions? There's one holdout. Isn't that right? Anyone ever see 12 Angry Men? The movie 12 Angry Men? No? Oh boy, you should see it. It's great. Of course, the movie is 11 versus 1 in a murder trial. So notice how stories keep coming back? So, and this one juror holds out and saves the day in the end. Okay. So here we have one juror holding out. But what do you think is underlying the jurors? And I'll just go right to page 433, right at the bottom. With Roger Porter. Wouldn't put it past him, said Roger Porter. The man looks damn sly to me. What kind of evidence is that? He looks sly to me. You know how they are.
Like reading a book by its cover.
Yeah, judging a book by its cover. Exactly. No pun intended, right? We have jokes flying tonight on the grand finale episode. Okay. Chapter 31. There's more about Arthur. I didn't really get too much more into Arthur, but if you look at page 436, I was struck by something, and maybe let me see if this as well. I'll read a part of this long paragraph, where it says at 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, the power came again, and the furnace. He roamed through the house, turning off lights and up the baseboard heaters. The pipes, he knew, would begin to thaw now, and he decided to listen to the house while it came back to itself. He made tea and took it into his father's old study, a room with a view of the water in daylight, and of his father's much-loved rhododendrons. He sat in silence at his father's desk, in his father's chair, with a single light on. He waited while the furnace gradually warmed the house, and then Ishmael heard water moving in the pipes and the drip from the taps he'd left open. He waited a while longer before moving through the house again to see that the pressure was strong everywhere, and then he shut down the taps. Everything seemed to have held up. Is he? Right, when that happens. He's at his mother's house. Not to be sexist or stereotyping or whatever, but what are all the things that he did, or what kind of things when the power came back on? Goes around checking all the pipes, furnace, checking to make sure there's no leaks.
Like a husband would do.
Yeah, kind of like the dad-husband thing. Is that the dad thing? Go around and do all those things. So see how symbolically he's kind of become, he's at his mother's house, he's doing all those things. Sitting in the chair even. Looking out the window at his dad's flowers. So I thought that was interesting, that he's not only is, what we're seeing is he's kind of morphing. He's not becoming his father, but he's taking on some of those characteristics. He's doing the stuff. He's also going to be coming around kind of ethically, morally, to be more of his father's son, right? Page 442, the final section of Hatsu's letter. He's read this letter a few times, hasn't he? It's pretty brutal. It starts off on page 442, I don't love you, Ishmael. I don't think that's very vague. Right? I think that's pretty specific, okay? But there's a hint there in the italics. There's a little hint, because remember, why did she write this letter? Remember, did she write the letter because she didn't love him? No. Why did she write it? Her mother made her write it. So, Hatsu is very, very, and as we'll see in the next few pages, she's very, very smart and very, very observant. So she does what she can, because she's going to offer to let her mom read the letter, so she can't obviously say, my mom's made me, I don't love you, my mom made me write this. She can't do that. But what she writes is this: I wish you the very best, Ishmael. Your heart is large and you are gentle and kind, and I know you will do great things in this world. But now I must say goodbye to you. I'm going to move on with my life as best I can, and I hope you will too. I circled that. I'm going to move on with my life as best I can. Now, if you don't love somebody and you're writing them a letter to say goodbye, but I'm moving on as best I can. And it starts to dawn on him in the following paragraph that maybe something that she did send a message to him. And it is, and at the bottom of that paragraph, there was something in him she was grateful for, even if she could not love him. That was a part of himself he'd lost over the years. That was the part that was gone. And it was because, ironically, he had lost himself because he hadn't moved on. Let me try to get my head around that again. He had lost himself because he hadn't moved on. He hadn't changed. So he lost himself, who he was. You see, that's a very interesting paradox, I think. He lost himself, and he says that. He hadn't moved on. And it dawns on him. That's it. That's it. That's what happened to me. I did this. And then there's a touching line over on the top of 443 when he goes in and he looks at his mother sleeping. I have an interpretation of this line here. I'm not sure, I'll throw out what you think. He looks at it, he says, it doesn't matter whether he agreed with her about God. It was only instead, and here's the underline that I did, and she had not given up on loving him. She was his mother and had not given up on. What does that mean? Had she decided to accept him as a son? Or was there something else? Has she rejected him at any point in this book?
His
Who is?
Ishmael.
Ishmael's pushing everyone else away.
So he finally like has accepted that he's like loves people and like embrace her and try to help him instead of
That that's where the complete. Okay. And he has this moment, and this is a very key moment on that same page. Lots of stuff, big stuff happens at the closing here, right? He sits. And that in this lay its terrible beauty. Silent, cold, and bare, and that in this lay its terrible beauty. We talked about the weather. We talked about the relationship with Hatsu. These are all things that Ishmael can't do, or the war, excuse me. These are things that, what can he do about them? Nothing. So another, you said the push away, another moment of realization here is the world, this is what the world is. There are things that you can't control. And if you try to, you're just going to get upset and angry and start to withdraw because he's angry that he couldn't control these things. He was angry about Hatsu. He was angry about his arm. He was angry about what he saw in the war. Okay? And again, going back to Covey, boy, I can always bring Covey back in. But like 7 Habits, he talks about controlling things, right? Trying to control what you can't control. And what does that lead to? It doesn't work. Do we know people that do that? Do people like stew and get angry and tell you that here they come, they're going to talk about that thing again that they can't control, and they're really angry about it. They're not really fun to be around, okay? So he's realizing these things. It's dawning on him that this is what has happened, and the only thing I can control is what? What's the only thing he can control? Himself. How he reacts. What he does. He can choose to be angry and bitter at Hatsu and the world and the war, or he can control himself and he can control what he does. And what, not only does he have that emotional moment, but he's also got something concrete in his pocket right now that can make a difference. So going to the final chapter. Before we go to the final chapter, one minor point. Remember how I kept on talking? Do you remember when we talked about Karl Heine being so meticulously neat? Really, really neat? That's where the coffee, and pay attention to that coffee cup. There was a thing in there where he put the coffee cup down on the table. Why does the coffee cup come back later on? Do you remember? Yeah, it was not only was it where did they find it? If a coffee spilled in Karl Heine's boat, what would he do? He'd clean it up and put it back, right? So that was a clue that actually I believe the deputy had picked it up. And he'd also moved a few things that he shouldn't have moved, I think. But the cup in particular. So that was, and Hatsu is the one. If you notice, some people could complain about this last chapter. I'll tell you, because she does some great detective work all of a sudden in the last chapter. She notices the coffee cup and she says, that doesn't make sense. She remembers the coffee cup. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, conversation on the porch. He asks for something. What does he want? We thought he wanted to kill. We thought he wanted to split her hair. We thought, but then in the end, he to make it anyway. What does he ask her for? Or to do, I should say. To remember him. Okay? I think if you want to be hurt, if you want to hurt somebody, don't hurt them. That won't hurt. What would hurt them more is to say they're not they're not worth remembering. That would be worse, I think. And that's what he's afraid of. And she says, I will. And then, in a simple four-letter word, live. Live. Okay? And it all, with his real. She's married with children, loves her husband. That's what it is. And I can't control that even if I hold off this. And is that really going to fix things? He realized that's not going to solve anything. And there's a little thing where the author ties up on page 440. That he withheld that evidence. Okay? And she says, you knew about that. It wasn't new, was it? That's on. And he says what? What do you really, the only real, if it's heartfelt, the only real thing you can say on page 449. When somebody says, why did you do that? I didn't know what to do, and then I'm sorry. It's inexcusable. And what shows you the of Hatsu, not only, it shows that she knows him as a man, as a human being, because she just simply says, I understand it. Separate piece. Okay, you might not remember this section, but in a separate piece, there's, again, everything stories are the same. Gene nearly kills this friend of his, this character, and he confesses it, and his friend forgives him. And he says, how can you believe that? How can you believe? Like, he can't believe he's being forgiven. And he says, because I do. Because I do. And maybe you've had that experience yourself where you were in a position to forgive someone or someone forgave you and you just didn't see how that, but they just simply did it. Okay? And right after that, on page 449, what's the symbolism of what Hatsu says after the I'm sorry and I understand? There's a symbolic thing with the weather and the environment. What does she say as she looks around? Yeah, and everything looks so pure. Okay? You know that feeling of a new start? Okay, she looks at everything looks so pure, it's beautiful today. Okay? Details of them going back and proving that they have the correct evidence and the case is dropped. So the last thing I have, let me just make sure I've got really tight, is the last sentence of the book. Ishmael gave himself to the writing of, and as he did so, he understood this, too. That accident ruled every corner of the universe except the chambers of the human heart. Now, there's a play on words there. The chambers of the human heart, why is that word significant? It's his last name, right? So the idea is that accident, things that happen in the world are like dominoes. They affect things. And there are a lot of things you can't control except they get the chambers, and that's his last name, of the human heart. So his heart is changed, apparently, and you have kind of an optimistic ending there. So what I just want to do before we close out is just go around, and I'm not asking for you to give a speech, okay, unless you want to. You know, we'll get a podium and everything. But I'll just start here, just closing thoughts on the book, just a few words, like what were your thoughts?
I liked it. I liked how they gave you the details of how they figured out the real story of what happened.
You liked it, and you liked how details came out of what happened to him. Let me really enjoyed about this book was, you know when you watch a TV and that didn't happen here. Like, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know. I thought, oh, I stole your thing? Okay, you were going to say?
I was going to say I liked the book because you didn't know if he was going to be guilty or not all the way up until the end.
Yeah, you didn't know. You really didn't know. And that was really, I like that. I like being, and the reason that he wasn't guilty was very interesting too, especially for an old sailor like me. I'm pretty salty. Okay, yes, what do you think?
I like how when Ishmael gave the evidence, he thought it would have feelings from the gun, and he thought something would come from it, and it didn't, but it also worked out the way it seems like it should have. He was able to move on. Because he didn't want to move on, but it ended up letting him move on.
Right, that's, I like that of having that evidence and having to have that internal conflict of what the right thing to do is, and coming to those realizations on his own with a little help from his parents. Even though his father's dead, his father's present, right? And his mom is there saying, Ishmael, I know you. I'm your mother. Okay, I know that you're not happy. He sits there and he's 30-something, right? And now, boy, not happy. Just, duh. Who doesn't know that? So, go ahead.
I really like how Moto was proven innocent. I feel like he was really, he got screwed over hard in this book, the whole time, other than Carl, obviously. But, he's done nothing but try to do the right thing and just keeps getting knocked down again and again.
And, right, and the portrayal of Moto, he's, not only does he getting knocked down, but he keeps getting up. He keeps getting, and it's an interesting balance because the author doesn't want to make him too good a character because then you're like, oh, he's innocent. But the more you learn, especially, I found the part where he was feeling the guilt over the murders or the killing, however you want to call it. I found that really striking. And that explained, because you know those people. Maybe you're a person like that yourself where you don't express your emotions a lot and people make judgments about you. They think that you're thinking this or you're stuck up or you're whatever, and you're really, I've heard a lot of times, some people that everybody thinks are really snobby and stuck up. It's not that they're that, but they're really just nervous and they're actually insecure. And everybody thinks that because they're just like this with no expression, that they're snobby. It's really interesting. That happens a lot. So learning something about judging people without any evidence. Back to the trial. Yes, ma'am. What were your final thoughts?
I was just really happy that there was kind of a happy ending for everyone.
Oh, yeah, things do work out for everyone, except for Carl. But for the most part, yeah. But it's a realistic ending. It's not saying life is great and rosy and daisy and strawberries for everybody. It's like life's hard, and how you deal with it really how your life is going to wind up. I really like that too. I'm also looking forward to seeing the film. So with all that, so I just wanted to thank you for your participation in this first ever TV class with G.A.P. We're hoping that if anyone at home is watching, we're just trying to get what people's thoughts are and just our numbers, people who are tuning in. So if you are, if you could shoot us a quick email at gapgreatbooks@sau19.com or a tweet at, tweet, I feel like at Easter, a delicious tweet for me. No, long story. So a tweet book on Twitter, Great Books, and we want to thank you for joining us every week, and maybe we'll do something like this again soon. So have a great evening.